Today, and I'm excited to be here. This is something I'm very passionate about because I come to it not just as a teacher and a researcher, but as a parent. And when people ask me what was the most surprising thing about parenting, it was how much of my time was spent monitoring screens. I was not prepared for that because my childhood looked remarkably similar to my parents' childhood. I spent a lot of time outdoors. My parents didn't know where I was, all those kinds of things. Things have changed quite a bit. And in fact, a lot of people would argue, let's go ahead and take a look here, is parenting now harder than it used to be, say 20 years ago? Most people would say yes. 2/3 of parents think it's harder to parent now than it used to be. And when they're asked why, these are the top 4 reasons that they give. And you'll notice that 3 of them are related to media technologies. 26%, just technology in general has made it harder. 21%, social media in general has made it harder. The third one is changing morals and more violence, drugs, and some people would argue the changing morals are part of the media question. And then finally, tech gives access and exposure at a younger age. So I think it's well worth parents taking a look at it. There are a lot of other concerns. Let's go ahead and take a look at a few more statistics that I think are interesting. I like this one. 71% of parents report they're concerned that their children, age 11 or under, may be spending too much time on screens. They're not just concerned in general. They're saying, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. I think my kids might be spending too much time on screens. And for parents of teens, a lot of the concerns are social media. So social media would include things like this: a desire for attention and approval that's unhealthy, that they're trying to get through social media, addiction to social media. That's a big concern for a lot of parents, are addictive type of behaviors, and that makes sense given the addictive tendencies of media, and that social media is affecting their teens' ability to socialize normally. You may have had an experience somewhat like mine. I was after church and I was talking to my son who had pulled out a phone right after church service. I'm like, well, why aren't you talking to somebody? He's like, I don't like talking to people. Okay. And being the parent I am, I made him put the phone away. I said, there's some friends of yours. Go over and talk to them. Now, that sounds obvious to me as a person, but it's not as obvious to my son's generation. Why would I go talk to people? I've got my phone. And so that's part of the concern, is how do we help people to have healthy relationships? There's things that we have to do as parents today that my parents probably didn't have to do quite as much. So when we think about parenting, I think we need to help each other. This was actually from a research from a study that was done in January of this year, and it found that parenting, people report it's been harder than they thought, a lot harder, 62%. Parenting is tiring most of the time. Any amens? 42% said it's tiring most or all of the time, and 28% said it is stressful most or all of the time. Parenting is tough, and so I think we really need to be helping each other with these questions. So when I think about helping each other with these kinds of questions, I think what's hard is not just what's happening, but that it's different. It's different from what I grew up with, but the truth is that even my son in high school is different from the kids in elementary school today. When my son was in elementary school, most of his friends didn't have phones, but that's not the case today. A lot more are getting them in elementary school. So when we think about it, these are a couple things. If you were here for the service, we talked about it. The average is 5 hours. It's actually technically 33 minutes of daily for people who are 8 to 12. And for those who are 13 plus, they're spending more than 8 hours and 30 minutes a day with media. That's a lot of media. And so it's well worth us thinking about it. What I'm going to have you do at your tables for just a few minutes is just share one challenge that you have experienced with parenting if you are a parent. And I'm going to ask you to do it just in like a sentence or two, because we could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about this, but just in a sentence or two. So if I were to put mine in a sentence, right, one of the things that I'm praying and working through is, Lord, I don't know if we're doing enough service as a family. Between extracurriculars and our jobs and media and those I don't know if we're serving enough. So I would say that's one of the challenges that I'm looking at right now in my own family life. So let me turn it over to your tables for just a moment. Just if you can, in a sentence or two, what is one of the challenges that you are facing as a parent? And you can choose what you share. All right, go ahead and finish the thought that you're on if you're on a sentence. This is one of the things I encourage parents to do, because sometimes I think it's social media, but it's also just who we are. We put up false fronts, like everything's fine. Have you ever had somebody ask you how you're doing and you walk by, you're fine, and you think, I am not fine right now. I am doing terrible right now. I mean, it's almost this reaction we have. And so I think we need to be honest with each other about where we're at. And the more that we can do this together, the better. In part because I think what we're seeing happening are some very concerning trends. So I've joked sometimes that people are always like, well, back in my day, grandparents say that and parents say that. It was better. But we're starting to get statistics to prove it. So let's just take a look at a few of those. One of those is these are college students reporting when they go into college as freshmen, just feeling overwhelmed. And what you see on the left is 1985, which is 18%. 2016, it's over 40%. So teens are feeling just more overwhelmed, and that makes sense. There's a lot of information coming at them, a lot of expectations online as well. So in fact, if you really talk to teens, some things they really like, but some things, if they're honest, it's stressful. People familiar with Snapchat streaks? Okay, if you go on Snapchat and you've been back and forth with a friend for like about 3 days, then it's, hey, you've got a streak going, don't break it. Every day you have to go on and send a message to that friend, or you break the streak, and you don't want to be the person breaking the streak. And if you got a lot of friends, you got a lot of streaks going. That's pressure. That's a lot of pressure. Another one, we know anxiety. I mean, these are just crazy statistics to me. 1 in 3 teens will experience an anxiety disorder. An anxiety disorder, not just feeling a little anxious. And this is coming from the American Academy of Pediatrics. 3 of the main reasons they're finding that kids are so anxious is pressure to succeed, which is in part media, because they're always seeing all these amazing things everybody else is doing. The second one is a world that feels scary, and we know that's a media effect. George Gerbner and his group have been doing studying the cultivation of a mean world. If you spend time on television, you're spending time with something that's 100 times worse statistically than our current world. Media worlds are more violent, they're more conflict-ridden, and they make the world feel scarier. And the third area is social media. That social media has some good parts, but it's got some stressors for teens. And a third one, this one, of course, is extremely concerning. Girls ages 10 to 14 suicides have tripled since 1999. That's a scary statistic, and we know that both young men and young women are being impacted, but young women are getting the brunt of it. And especially these vulnerable ages, we need to be very thoughtful. Because when you're already feeling just uncomfortable about yourself, or if there's bullying going on, when it's suddenly there for the whole world to see, and you can't get away from it 24/7, some people are taking the way out of suicide. So we've got to be concerned about what's going on. It's not that it's all bad news, but there's enough bad news that as parents, we've got to be concerned. And so what I'm going to be sharing today are going to be 10 different things that I think we can think about. At the risk of overwhelming you, please don't try to do all of these. I'm hoping that 1 or 2 of them will come up that you're like, oh, I should think more about this, or I should try this. But because I haven't gotten a chance to talk with you, I don't know exactly where everybody is. So I'm going to give you different ones that are aimed at different people, okay? Before we do that, however, I want to take a look at Romans 14, because I think it's a really important text. Romans 14. Accept the one whose faith is weak without quarreling over disputable matters. One person's faith allows them to eat anything, but another, whose faith is weak, eats only vegetables. The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. I use this quite a bit in my classes to talk about conflict and how do we handle things, and there's some truths I'm going to pull out of this, but one of the biggest things is, on top of parenting being hard, we don't need to be judging each other. There are going to be people who are going to come away and they're going to have a very restrictive use of media in their homes. And there are other people who are going to come away and they're going to have a sense, well, we do more media, but I sit with them and I guide them, and I'm trying to get them ready to be a digital citizen. I think both of those approaches have some merit. And I'm hoping that the one who takes a restricted approach doesn't judge the person who takes an approach with more media, as long as they're doing it in a wise way. And the one who takes a wise sense of media here doesn't look at the other restricted one and condemn them. We don't need that. Let's continue with what that set of verses looks at. One person considers one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord. Whoever eats meat does so to the Lord, for they give thanks to God. And whoever abstains does so to the Lord and gives thanks to God. So whatever media decisions we make them to the Lord. Okay, this is not just, hey, I got freedom to do whatever. My kid can play whatever that's gore, and I don't care about pornography, etc. That is not what this passage is saying. What this passage is looking at is what are people who are legitimately trying to follow the Lord with their choices might end up in some different places. So we may have to discuss a lot what we think is, okay, this is not a disputable matter, this is wrong, but this is disputable, and people can land on different places. It's a really important concept. The last part of it, you then, why do you judge your brother or sister, or why do you treat them with contempt? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat. Our choices are important. We ought to make them for the Lord, but it doesn't help us if we're judging each other on things that are disputable, right? All right, we're going to go ahead and get into our parenting principles. I mentioned there are 10 of them we're going to work through today, and I'm going to start with this one. We need to be the parents. There are a lot of people who are like, I don't understand this stuff, just whatever, they do it. They're the digital natives. That is not a good approach. There are two parenting styles that don't do very well with media. One is that one. I don't know what they're doing, let them do what they're doing. That's the, I'm not parenting on this, I don't know about it, I don't want to know about it. That does not work very well. The other one that doesn't work is a highly restrictive parenting style with no explanation, with no working things through for people. Those are the kids who sneak the most media, and those are the kids who go crazy with media after they're 18. So we have to be careful about these kind of things. What does it mean to be the parent? You are wiser than your kids. Yes. You know more about privacy. You know more about how news works and how businesses work. You know more about how to exercise self-control. Your brain is developed. You know all kinds of things that they don't know, and they need your wisdom badly. Just because you're letting a bunch of 8- and 9-year-olds into a place like a social media, they shouldn't be there in the first place. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But if they are, guess what? They do stupid things. Parenting can really make a difference. So we cannot just go, I don't care, I don't want to know. We've got to do our homework. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Second thing, please do not do virtually what you would not do in real life. So if you would probably not send your 8- to 9-year-old into a room and say, there's a bunch of people in here, some of your friends, some of your family, and there's some that are strangers who could take your identity, and some could do even something worse. Good luck in there, okay? You wouldn't do that. So do not give an 8-year-old a phone and just let them go. You would probably not take your 10 to 11-year-old boys and put them in a room with hundreds or thousands of other boys with no adult supervision. Would you be surprised if there's crude language? Would you be surprised if there's pornography? Would you be surprised if they create risky challenges that end up with some kids around the world getting killed? Happens on TikTok. No, there's a reason why we don't take a bunch of boys and put them in a room and go, good luck in there. Hope it's okay. Would you give your 12 to 13-year-old girl a box of tools and say, I don't really know how these work. I know that some of these are good, and some of these will teach you to hate your body, and some of these will teach you how to self-harm, and it might be all right. You could be scarred for life. You go in your bedroom, and you just do that. You just play with those tools for hours, and I'll just be out here, and I hope it goes well. You would not do that. So don't do it virtually. Children should not have smartphones until they are responsible enough for them. People should not be on social media until they are ready for it. And just like we wouldn't take a teenager and say, hey, you're driving a car, here are the keys, we would instruct them. We would sit next to them and walk them through it. We would help them for hours and hours before we let them on their own. Smartphones should be treated the same way. They need to understand how they work, and you need to be beside them as they're figuring these things out. So do not do virtually what you know would not be wise in real life. Third principle, and this is one of my favorites, be goal-oriented in your parenting. And I'm going to be honest, my kid's in high school. My goal-oriented when he was 1 was, my goal is to have a shower today, okay? So if you're in that stage, bless you. Sometimes that's all you can do as a parent. But overall, we want to be more goal-oriented than I just want my kids to stop fighting for 2 seconds. We want to be a little bit more goal-oriented than I want them to get off the iPad and not argue with me. Those aren't bad things, but we want to be a little more goal-oriented than that. So when we think about kind of the goal-oriented for parenting, go ahead, make your approach to mass media part of those goals. And I've got a sample goal on there for you. There's more goals that we can talk about as well. Say we want our children to develop a healthy view of their own bodies and others' bodies. And the reason I picked that is because that's one of the media effects. Girls in particular often feel worse about their own bodies when they spend time on media. So we're going to limit certain kinds of content and ads because they don't help people to feel good about themselves. We're going to talk about bodies as gifts from God and that they're amazing things and they can look different ways and they can do different things. And we're going to be spending time talking about disabilities in positive ways. There's a lot that we're going to be doing to get a healthy view of bodies. And we want to think about how do we do mass media together. One of the things I'm going to recommend is co-watching. Because then if a character is making a bad choice, you can actually talk with your kid about that in that moment. And go, do you notice that? This is what the Bible says about this. Or this is what we believe about this. Or this is what's important. God made these bodies and they are fearfully and wonderfully made. And we shouldn't put down somebody else's body. So we think about these as overarching goals. Let me give you a couple others. These are not on your sheet. I want my children to develop empathy for other people and to do unto others. There are some marvelous educational programs out there. Dora the Explorer, Barney, I know it might be hard for you to watch it, but it actually has some good effects on kids. Sesame Street, there are a number of them that we have documented effects that they do actually increase things like the ability to learn, but also empathy for other people. So if you pick the right kinds of things, you can help that. But then you also want to develop, of course, empathy in real life, doing family service projects together, for example. So we think about both media and non-mediated ways of doing goals. And our final one here, I want my children to use media in moderation. So from very young ages, you begin to teach that. You model it in your own life and you teach it. Maybe you teach them how to use a timer and how to set a timer themselves. Maybe when they're ready for a phone, you show them how phones can turn off. And if you don't know how to do that, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So we think about modeling moderation and then teaching them moderation and teaching them why it's difficult to have moderation. I'm going to talk about that in a moment as well. So for Christians, we might have some other things. So sample goals for a media-saturated age for Christians might look like this. How do we parent our children to love God? How do we think about that? Are there particular shows that we can use? You can argue about VeggieTales, but that's something we used when my son was younger. And then we would talk about that. We would watch it and we would talk about it. How do we parent our children to love others in person and online? And these are great discussions to have with a spouse. These are great discussions even if your kids are old enough to have as a family. Other ones you can do, how do we understand the purpose of our lives? A lot of kids grow up and they don't understand purpose. We talked about that some this morning in church. But people want to have purpose to their lives. Most kids even want to have purpose to their lives. And one of the simple ones most kids can grasp is doing good works. So a couple of the things, how do we glorify God? Let's talk about that. How do we actually do that? Another one on here, a couple others, good works, or how do we make disciples? Depending on the age of your kids, these are good questions for you to talk about as a family and to think through. And think through as you do it, both online and offline ways to do it. Okay? All right. How is the pace? I know I'm going fairly quickly. You guys doing all right? Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. All right. So we talked a little bit about being the parents. We've talked a little bit about our sample goals, and we've talked about not doing in reality what we wouldn't do virtually. Let's go ahead and move on to our next one, which is going to give you a moment to write down one goal for your children. Maybe one you already have set. It might be one you thought, oh, that was a good one that was mentioned. Take a moment and just write down on your paper what's one goal you would have for your children. If you're grandparents, for grandchildren. If you don't have kids at this point, what's a goal for yourself? If you're still working on your goal, that's fine. And for some of you, it might be like, I can't do it right now. That's fine. Take this home, do it at another time. But the questions I'd like you then to think about just for a few moments. The first question on here would be thinking about how media can help. How can it support that goal? What are things what your kids could do, or how you could use it together as a family? Are there ways that media can help you with that goal? And then its corollary would be the next one was, what do you need to watch out for so that media doesn't hamper it or get in the way? You may end up revisiting this. I think it's a really important question, so I'll just give you a sample. One of the things that I really want for my family is I want family closeness. And so one of the things we do with mass media, for example, I don't watch television by myself, ever. If I watch television, it's a co-watching. We're all together there, and we watch together, and we snuggle under blankets, and we talk about it afterwards. We're careful about the things that we do. My son loves engineering, he loves math, he loves science, and so he'll find YouTube videos. He'll be like, oh, Mom, you got to see this. And we'll sit and we'll watch it together, and he'll tell me, tell me what you're excited about with that. So mass media, I found, can be really wonderful if we use it together. What my family has to watch for is like anybody. I'm on my laptop doing my work, and my husband's down in his office doing his work, and my son's doing homework, and then it bleeds into something else, and pretty soon there's hours when we don't talk to each other. So we have to be careful about that. A lot of families have to be careful about that. So that's just a sample, and this can be really useful as we're thinking about, okay, what do I want to do? How can mass media be part of that? If you want that to be part of your family structure in that way, and how do I need to be careful? Where do I need to be careful? And again, here's a place where we might end up with disputable matters that we don't judge each other on. We might end up with some people having different answers to these questions. All right, here's the one that gets really personal. This one, then we'll get personal. Keep the end in mind, and this is something I think that I had to come to as well. The ultimate goal is not for our children to obey us unthinkingly forever. It might be exactly what we're doing early, but that's not the goal, because at some point they leave. The goal is to get them to the place where they actually are self-regulating, and they are understanding, okay, I want to honor the Lord. This is why I'm doing this. So whenever we're thinking about our goal is not, again, unless the kids are very young, absolutely, then unquestioning obedience can be it. But we want to make sure by the time they leave our homes that they're ready. And so we're going to talk about a number of ways to do that. How do we help move from monitoring to mentoring? And that's it. So we provide scaffolding, we provide guidance, we provide modeling, we work with them on these questions. Because I think it's the rare person today who can do no mass media. Our jobs, schooling, all that it requires. So we really want to teach them, how do you manage it? How do you manage it? And we'll talk about ways to do that. But again, for me, the end in mind, my son's getting closer to leaving. And I've got that very much in mind. I mean, are we teaching him so he understands, so he's making good choices? All right, here's where we get personal. Model, and model again. What does your relationship with technology look like? What does your relationship with mass media look like? Your kids will learn far more from what you do than from what you say, and particularly if what you say and what you do are different, that's going to create problems for them. So I've got some areas. Do you spend enough time? More than half of parents admit on surveys they spend too much time on their phones, too much time on their laptops, too much time not paying attention to their children. The majority of parents admit that. We need to not be that way. We need to be very thoughtful about how much and how controlled we are. Otherwise, how in the world do we tell them that they need to be self-controlled? The second thing, do we ignore people around us, especially our children? A fascinating study was done in a fast food restaurant. So the researcher and her confederate sat there and they watched a number of caregivers and children. The vast majority of caregivers were on their phones as they were eating in this restaurant. And kids were getting increasingly accelerated in their attempts, to the point that one child was like trying to push the caregiver's face up, off the phone. I've been to Disney once with my son, and our family was thoroughly enjoying that, and we stood in line, and I cannot tell you how many parents were there with their kids, and their kids are dancing around and talking to them, and they're standing there on their phones. I'm like, why did you pay to come here? Okay, it's just so easy to do, to just ignore our children because we're more interested in what's on our phones. Or are we prioritizing other people? A third area we have to be careful of is content. Are we actually doing what's making us holy? Are we really making good content choices for ourselves or not? What are we modeling to our children? What are we showing them about what we believe about media content and its effects on us? And finally, what are we creating? Do we post impulsively and wish we hadn't later? Or are we careful? And here's one: asking permission of a child before posting a photo. A lot of kids get embarrassed by the kinds of photos, and because there's a digital footprint that follows them the rest of their lives, we need to be thoughtful about that. And if we model, we say, I've got this photo, I'd like to put it up, is that okay with you? That model's asking other people, is it okay if I post this about you? That's a really important skill. And parents have to be very thoughtful about all the stuff they're putting on without a child's knowledge and without a child's permission, because that digital footprint will follow them in a way that, honestly, I don't have any of my baby pictures online. Didn't have it. But now kids, their whole lives can be chronicled and people can find that stuff, and they may not want it. So I think we have to be thoughtful about these kind of things. So our modeling is really important. Are we living lives of integrity with mass media? Are we showing our kids exactly the kinds of things? And if not, we need to think through, how do we change how we're modeling? Whew, that's a hard one. This one is also a little bit hard. If you're not yet comfortable with research, you're going to have to do your homework. We cannot have our kids on stuff we don't get. If your kid's asking for a video game, you need to go find out about that video game. If your kid wants to get on this social media, you gotta find out about that social media. The good news is this is super easy to find. So I realize I'm a researcher, so you can be very specific. Video game affects boys research. Put in anything you wanna know. Do you wanna know? And you can get down to Minecraft boys affects research. You can find all kinds of things, but if you put research or studies on the back of it, you'll get better information. They'll show you actual data about it, not just a bunch of people blogging their ideas. So put research or studies at the end, and you'll get better scientific information about it. But you can be very specific. And that's wonderful because you can find out, is Minecraft okay for a 7-year-old boy? You'll find stuff. So this can be very, very helpful. Please don't give your children blessings to download stuff you don't know what it is. Take the time to look it up. It really doesn't take very long to do that. And I've got some apps that you can take a look at. I've got those listed in there as well. You can go ahead and move us forward there. So Common Sense Media can be very helpful. They can give you a lot of good information. Kids in Mind and PluggedIn.com are good resources that you can look at to find out what's there. What is this content if I don't know about it? You want to find out about parental controls. And unfortunately, I don't have enough time, given our time frame, to go through, here's how you do it on Snapchat, here's how you do it on TikTok, here's how you do it on Facebook. Fortunately, all you have to do is put in parental controls Snapchat, parental controls TikTok, parental control, whatever it is, you can put it in and that'll bring it back up. Now, I'm not arguing for using Snapchat or TikTok. What I'm saying is, if you're contemplating it, please research it, and then look at how you put the parental controls in place. All right. This can be one of the most powerful things to do, is if your child is old enough, research it together. That way you're modeling how to research things, they learn how to do it, and it makes it harder for them to argue with you when you're saying no. If they're like, oh yeah, I see the actual content here. Okay, I'm not saying they won't still argue. But it's a wonderful tool to do. It's very helpful because then you're actually talking about real information. You're not just arguing, you never let me do anything. That's not a helpful conversation. But actually talking about, let's look up the content and let's talk about why we're doing this or not doing this. That's a different and much more productive kind of conversation, even if it's still conflict. And then we got a final one here. If you're struggling, please get tech help. Most of us have somebody in our family who gets it. We probably have people in this church who could say, hey, I'd be more than happy to sit down. I'd be happy to run an hour seminar on stuff on how to set up parental controls. We've got people like that. One of the recommendations is if you are on social media with a child and you're like, you know somebody, say you've got a niece or a nephew, somebody who's in college that you trust, let them know, hey, my kid is on this, would you also watch out? Would you also look out for him? And let me know if you see anything that you think is problematic. That can be great to have somebody else who's helping you with this. And that person can actually model, because sometimes kids will listen to a niece, or one of their cousins, who goes, hey, you shouldn't be posting that stuff. That can be a really helpful technique as well. So please be comfortable with research. If you're not, just get yourself to the point you're like, I can do this, I can do this. It really is not that hard today to find the kind of information that you need. And doing your homework will make you feel like, okay, I'm making better decisions. I can be fully convinced in my own mind that I'm doing the right thing. All right. I know I'm doing a lot of talking here, just trying to get through all of my principles here. I will give you a moment to talk in just a second here. This is one of the things I love. Talk, and talk some more. First thing, talk about anything. If your kids are young, just get used to talking to them about anything. I don't care if it's silly, if it's about cereal, if it's about their boots they're putting on. Because they found that when you start to talk with a kid, they get used to talking to you. And if they get used to talking to you at age 3, then they're still used to it at age 6, and they're still used to it at age 16. And they're far more likely to talk to you about difficult things at 16 if you started at 3. If you paid attention to them, if you've just started the habit of conversation. The other thing you can do is talk about media. So we're going to have just talk in general, and then we're going to have talk about media. I don't know, I've lost my... No problem up here. So if you were at the service this morning, you know that there's some things that I think are really important that people need to know about media. One of the biggest ones is that it's addictive. And I don't mean that in the sense that everybody's addicted to it, but it's got addictive tendencies to it. And kids need to understand that. They need to understand that there's a reason why it's difficult for them to pull themselves away. So intermittent rewards, I think they need to know that that's kind of part of how people get you hooked on something. I mentioned this morning that that's actually exactly what they use for slot machines, for casinos, et cetera, is occasionally giving you a reward. So if they are occasionally going and seeing something, if they're occasionally on a video game, get what they want, or beat the boss, they have trouble getting off. Another thing I want them to know about is fear of missing out. There will always be something they're missing out on. Always be something they're missing out on. And we're going to have to work together with them to say, you can't be online constantly just in case you miss something. There's a very important life that you're living here. And so we'll have to work with them on that and understanding that that is going to constantly be pulling them toward it. And we're going to have to say, you know what, let's talk about this, because otherwise, 24 hours a day, you're going to be wondering what you're missing out on. A lot of games and things have punishment for staying offline. I already mentioned Snapchat streaks. You're punished if you aren't on there every 24 hours. You lose your streaks. You lose opportunities for specialized characters. They're only available these 2 hours a day. We have to help our kids understand that media is a business, and it's a business that wants them. If they understand it, and I can tell you, I've done this with my son all of his life, that understanding, it's a helpful conversation. We've been able to work with my son differently because he understands the way this works. They need to know how ads work. Consumerism is one of the biggest things that is a media effect. The more any media, just even in the United States, but if you take United States media and you move it into a new country, people who didn't want things before want things. Demands go up for things like Coca-Cola in countries where they didn't yet have American media. So that we have to teach them that that's part of what they're doing. The ads are feeding desires for things that they don't need. Another thing that they need to know is the effects of media devices on them. I talk to my son a lot, as you can probably tell. So one of the things I say to him is, why do you have headphones on? Right now, there's an interesting study that recently came out. 1 billion people in the world are at risk of premature hearing loss. The biggest problems are going to concerts and venues, and second, headphones, earbuds, because our ears aren't designed for that. And so as often as possible, I'm telling my son, your ears are designed this way. Take the headphones off so you're hearing the sound. I don't mind hearing the sound with you. Take the headphones off unless you absolutely need them. We have hearing loss going on. Nearsightedness is up over 60% in the United States. We're affecting our vision. We're affecting our posture. I have this issue. I'm hunched over more than I should be. There's neck issues. If you've got gamers, we need to teach them. That's part of the reason you limit things is because your body can't handle it. It can't handle hours and hours a day. We teach them about emotions. There's a lot of anxiety that comes with a lot of media use, that scary world, and we teach them about their brains. I talked a little bit this morning about news, that news is presented as two-sided and conflict-oriented and crisis, and pretty soon they're thinking in those ways. They're thinking about the world as conflict and as crisis. And information can be so helpful for them. It doesn't all, in fact, it shouldn't all be negative. Talk about how media can be a better part of their lives. What are the things they really love? What are the things that they don't care for? Has any of you played a game or done something you thought, I'm not even enjoying this anymore, but I can't get off? Or social media, I don't even know why I'm still on it. Kids have that experience. So talking about, okay, how do we actually make it a better experience? How do we do that? Those kinds of conversations are really important to have. Again, tip, if a kid argues about it, research it with them. And then you're at least, again, discussing something. Let's move on. A couple other ideas. Narrate your own use of mass media. I love this one. So let's, for example, your phone goes off with a ding and you're playing with a kid. You might say, hey, I'm going to check that and make sure that's not your dad or your mom, or I'm going to check that and make sure that's not a doctor. If it's not, I'm going to continue playing with you. If so, I need to answer this real quick, and then I'm going to come back. Do you see what you just modeled? How do you handle it when you hear those dings? And it's really good for a child to hear, I need to answer this because this is my boss, but after that, I'll come play with you. And then other times you hear that ding and go, you know what? That's something I don't need right now. My priority is playing with you. What a powerful message for a kid. You're more important. And you're modeling that we don't have to constantly respond. Narrate how you do emails. Narrate how you decide on what shows to watch and what not shows to watch. All this talking helps, and it begins to give them a critical mindset. Explain rules to children and teens. I mentioned that there's some parenting things that don't work real well. The one is permissive. The other is the restrictive parent who doesn't explain why, because it's not helping them develop their own sense of self-restraint. But explaining why helps. So for example, my son's computer is in the living room, which is where it's supposed to be. It's been there ever since he's gotten a computer. And explain why. This is why we should not have computers in bedrooms. And he knows all the detail, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But explain the rules. They know why. When appropriate, ask your children and teens to discuss family decisions. As your kids age, invite them to be part of it. We're trying to make media a really good, healthy part of our lives. Let's talk about it. How do you want to do this? Okay? And we're going to take into account your opinions as we make family decisions. That's really powerful. And it gives them a sense of being a little more grown up and being part of these decisions. And it models how to talk and make decisions. Ask questions, especially as kids get older. Okay, we know you want to love other people. You want to love people. So you're thinking about doing this post. And one of the recommendations is that when kids are just learning how to do social media, you approve every post before it goes up. Is that loving? What's that do for kids? They have to actually reflect before they post and go, oh yeah, I can see why that might not. Okay, how can we rephrase that so that is loving? Or how can we just scrap that and let's do something else that is loving? Asking questions can get kids to actually think and have to defend their own choices, which is a great thing to build into their heads. Talk about their mistakes, and they will make mistakes, but talk about them in a non-threatening manner. Let's say, let's talk about what just happened there. I know your friend's angry because of what just happened. Let's talk about that. The reason to do it in a non-threatening manner is because as kids get older and the consequences potentially get bigger, you don't want them to go, oh, mom or dad's going to blow up if I mention this. So I'm just not going to mention it. That's what we don't want. So when they make mistakes, even if you are inside screaming, try to respond in a non-threatening manner. Okay? And you can deal with it, later. And a lot of times, really a very good suggestion that I also read was, don't give a punishment right then. Talk about it, deal with it, problem solve it with them, take care of whatever issue is going on, and then say, we'll talk about this consequence later. That can be helpful for you to cool down and for them, again, to focus on fixing whatever the big issue is that was created. And then as we're talking about it, whether it's mistakes or other things, we want to be thoughtful about not avoiding constant negativity, okay? Part of the reason for that is that most of our own media use it's not negative. I love media. I love having a GPS. I love being able to look up symptoms in the middle of the night when my kid's sick. I love a lot of it. So I think it helps for kids if we don't always talk about it negatively. We can talk positively about it too. What are the things we want to benefit? How can we make this better? It can be very helpful. All right, good. I was going to say, hopefully I've got a chance for you guys to talk. Think for a moment, when you were growing up, what encouraged you to talk to a parent or a guardian or somebody important to you? What was encouraging to you, or what made you go, oh, I'm not saying that to mom or dad or whoever it was? What was that was helpful for you? Let me turn it over to your tables to talk for a moment. All right, finish the thought you're on. All right, we're going to jump back into it. Again, if you're on information overload, I totally understand. That's why you have the sheet in front of you. Write it down, and you can take a look at it later. And again, don't try to do all 10 of these. Just pick 1 or 2 that really resonate with you if this is helpful. All right, this one is my top one. I do spend a bit of time on it. If you have young kids, you are in such a good situation. Start early. So I get together with a mom's group once a month, and I was talking with some of them, and they're like, well, we never see our kids anymore. But if you probe further, what you find out is those kids have a television in their room, or they have a computer in their room, or they have a gaming system in their room, and they don't come out. So my son, as I mentioned, his stuff's in the living room. It always has been. He knows why it's there. We've never had an argument about it. He's 16, and I still see him all the time. Because that's one of the best things. No devices in bedrooms. So if you're early, start there and don't budge. It's important for sleep. It's important for keeping them in the midst, and then you know more what they're doing. My son calls us over all the time. Oh, come see this. Let's do that. You know, I know what he's doing. Communities will often sit down and sit by and see what he's doing, and it's just normal for him because he's always done it, and he knows why. It's one of the best things. In fact, if there's anything I would recommend, this is the number one. Keep devices out of bedrooms in public places where they know they're being observed, where they know a parent can walk by or a sibling can walk by. That's where you want them. And if you've already done this, I'll get there in a moment, I promise. Number 2, co-watch. This is one of my favorite things to do. I love doing it. I've loved doing it since the time I was little. If they're on there, to the extent you can, watch with them. What I found is that my son would watch something early in the day, and then at bedtime, I'd sit down with him, and he'd bring it back up. He was still thinking about it. But I knew exactly, because I'd sat there and watched it with them. And we could have a talk about that. Okay, this is why it's bothering me, or this is why I'm not sure why this character did this. We had wonderful conversations that I wouldn't have known what he was talking about if I hadn't done that. Co-viewing is also something that my mom did, and I didn't like it at the time, I'll be honest. Because I remember sitting in a movie, and then she'd turn to go, men aren't like that. Marriage isn't like that. That's unrealistic. I was like, oh my gosh, Mom, please. But you know what? It built that in my head. I knew marriage isn't like that. Relationships aren't like that. It's one of the best things you can do. It helps them to build a critical thought. All right, 3rd, have regular media-free times. Meals are wonderful. Sit down for dinner together. Nobody's got a phone. Nobody's got an iPad or anything. Talk. And you can have, if you want to, have a jar with, ideas for people can put in. Like, let's talk about this. And you know what you can do? You can add in some media-related ones. Like, why do you think social media is so popular? Those kinds of things. So if you have a jar of discussion if you want to, but whatever it is, before bed, Incredibly important that people are not on devices about an hour before bedtime, earlier if you can make it. And the reason for that is sleep, because those devices emit light, and that light just says to our brains, hey, it's daytime, I should be awake. So it's the worst thing you can do to have a kid right before they go to bed, playing a video game, watching a video, even if it's good content, not good. So have that in your plan. In the car. I know I'm talking a lot about my son, but at one point he pulled out a phone in the car, and I was like, hey, there's a real person in the car, put it away. And now we have wonderful conversations in the car, and he's just used to it. The car's at conversation time. Some families have tech-free evenings, so they might just pick a Thursday, and that's tech-free. Or they might have a weekend even, where they're just like, hey, we're going to have a family adventure, tech-free times. But make sure that they're built into your family life. The fourth big one, you've already heard me say, research together. It's a big tip, and I'm just giving you top recommendations from lots and lots of experts in the area. And the final one, parents have passwords. Don't let a kid have something that you don't have the password that you can spot check. It doesn't mean you have to watch everything they're doing, but have access to it, because the mistakes can be big. And then over time, you shift from monitoring very carefully with younger kids and helping them with that process to mentoring as they get more into teenagers, mentoring how they do it. So if I had any recommendations, these are the top ones, with that first one being my number one. So let me just give you a few other areas. Overall time. And you may not have heard these. Actually, the big warnings about media are not coming from the church. They're coming from the American Pediatric Association. They're coming from the American Psychological Association, that are seeing all the health benefits and the issues, mainly issues. 0 to 2, they argue for no screen time. None, except for video chatting, like with grandparents. If you're a parent and you need to take a shower, do not feel guilty if you give them one video. But you should not have lots of videos here. This is one of the most important critical brain development times. And what they found is kids do not learn well from media. They learn from a real person. They learn language, they learn facial expressions. There's so much going on during these years. That's why they recommend no screens. When you hit 3 to 5, they argue for a maximum of 1 hour a day, education rich. These are your Doras, these are your Sesame Streets, these are your Barneys, and spread it into chunks during the day, rather than just plopping them in front of it for an hour, so that they'll get the most out of it in smaller chunks. And then above that, maximum of 2 hours of screen a day. That's everything combined. No more than 1 hour of social media total. These are the best, and I can tell you from having read the research, these are your best outcomes. These really are your best outcomes. It's hard to do, but it's worth it. And there's a lot of reasons for these outcomes. Let me go ahead and talk just briefly about that. When you're talking about certain ages, there's just a ton of brain and language and social development, especially that 0 to 2. They just need interaction. In fact, if a television's just on in the background, they found parents talk to their kids 90% less. And kids need that talking. That's how they learn how to talk. That's how they learn how to connect. A second thing that we need to be worried about is the more people are on media beyond those 2 hours, especially 4 hours plus, it's correlated with anxiety, it's correlated with depression, irritability, suicidal tendencies. So when you start to get into more media, that's when you get into the big things. The other thing that's really important is it interrupts sleep. And anybody who's got a phone in their bedroom is getting at least 1 hour of sleep less a night than people who don't have phones in their bedrooms. Often it's much more than that. And you know what also is correlated with too little sleep? Anxiety, depression, suicidal tendencies. Some people believe that our media issue is at least in part a sleep issue. Kids aren't getting enough sleep. And that affects not only that, but their ability to make good decisions. So we have to make sure we're protecting those sleeping areas. It also correlates with obesity. Obesity is out of control in this country. It started with television. It was about 13% in the 1970s. It's up to 36% obesity now, and 70% overweight in the US. It's part of a big media effect. Posture problems, vision, hearing, things we talked about. So it really does matter how much. And the last thing we're going to talk about in terms of top recommendations for content, you're going to hear some repetition of what we talked before, modeling and talking about what you watch and why. So again, this for the same reason modeling works and for the same reasons talking works. It works really well for people making content decisions. Second one, ask family members what they want. Why do you want to watch that? Why do you want to play that game? And if it's like, well, my friends are doing it. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's find out more about the content. Is there something about the content itself? Have those discussions. Really listen and interact so you understand why they want certain things. That can be very productive conversations. And of course, research. Again, I'm not going to spend much time with that. We've talked about the importance of researching it and researching it together if you can. This we've not talked about. It's good to set up family guidelines for choices because then you can just compare them. Some people just use what's up there. This is the ratings for video games. So E, E10+, T, M, and adults only. I don't necessarily recommend just holding to those because they're going to like, hey, I'm 13, I can play whatever. But I do recommend don't go any younger than that. Does that make sense? So if it's a T game, don't have anybody under 13 playing it. You may choose not to do it even if they're 13. But these can be good cutoffs for, we're no younger than that, we're doing these. Another one you can do, common sense media or some certain cutoffs, nothing under 4 stars on something like that. Another one you can do is read reviews together and just jointly we decide. You guys can think of lots of different ways. Fourth one you can do, parents, I like this one. Parents can choose to do it after the child presents a presentation on it. Teaches them to research, teaches them to think about it, teaches them to try and persuade, and sometimes they'll talk themselves out of it. They're like, Mom and Dad are never going to go for this, okay? And they just self-censor. It's like, nah. Scripture verses can be good things to do. So just have guidelines that people know. Here's one that I think that can be the final content that I think is really interesting. Encourage creating. My husband teaches computer science, and he said the big difference to me are the consumers versus the creators. So video games where you create worlds can really, there's some great evidence that they actually build creativity for people. Let's make a song together. Let's use GarageBand. Let's figure out how to use Audacity, whatever it is. Making a video, let's learn how that works. Creating can be a great thing to do for content. It teaches them how media works, and again, it's giving them so many more skills than just passively taking in the media. All right. What if you didn't start early? What if you're like, oh, my kid has devices in their bedroom and we're messing up right and left? Please do not panic. And also, please don't give up. Don't think, oh, well. You can do a reset. You probably can't reset everything, but choose at least one thing that you can reset. Okay? So if it's late, if your children are older, decide where to start. If you look it up, do your own research and decide, yeah, we got to get devices out of bedrooms. Talk with your kids about it and just say, we're going to be working on this particular one. Research the area you chose ideally together with older kids and go, okay, this is why. This is why. It's affecting sleep. It's affecting these kinds of things. I think for our health, we need to do it. And if you can say, we're going to get them out of our bedrooms too. We're going to do it as a family. Can be a good way to do it. All right? Discuss the plan together. Again, if you've got older kids and it's already in place, it's helpful to discuss, prepare them, help them to think it through before you do the plan. Number 4, set a time. We're going to start this here. And then we're going to try for the 5th step, try for 2 weeks or a month, and then we'll come back together as a family and discuss it. How's it going? Okay? So again, don't try to change everything, but if something's off and you know it's off, don't just leave it off. Pick something and try and go through these steps and do a reset. It will be harder. That's why you start early if you can, but if you can't, that's okay. Please don't leave it, especially if it's an important one. All right. Take a moment. You got a lot in front of you. Are there any of these top recommendations you would like to try? Star it, circle it. It's great if you're like, I'm doing them all. That's wonderful. A lot of us aren't. All right, finish the thought you're on. All right, I know I'm pushing it on time here, but I think this next one is really important, so I'm going to go ahead and just do it because social media is its own big animal. Please take extra care with social media. It's different than video gaming. It's different than watching YouTube videos. It's different than searching. It's got its own unique challenges. Please know it is an important part of a lot of teen socializing. And so that makes it just rough because people are like, well, everybody's on there. They may not be exaggerating that a lot. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's cultural change. Parents have gotten so overprotective. Am I the only one who's like, my parents did not know where I was, like from 1 in the afternoon till 5 in the summers? I mean, they had no clue. Now we know, and in fact, we might be tracking them through their phones, you know? So essential and deliberate tactics by the companies, all of that thing, that's kind of where they gather to do their stuff as opposed to the mall or the park. We can argue with what it is, but it is. However, the current legal age to join is 13. That is legal. However, 30% of parents say their 9 to 11-year-olds are already on TikTok. Bad idea. Somebody has to lie about their ages to do that. Do not teach your kids to lie about their ages. And even if other people are on there, I think you say 13 is the legal age. It's kind of like talking about drinking. There is a legal age to this. You're not supposed to be on it before 13. Now, the reason for that is because that's when media companies can start legally tracking you. That's the reason for it. It's not because 13 is the magic great age. It's because it's about legally when those companies can keep track of everybody's information. It's a privacy issue. But please don't have them on there before 13. Talk, just like you would do for a car. Talk about social media. Talk about best practices. You know, post positive things. If you want to argue with a friend, don't do it online. You know, talk about things that are good practices. Talk about what to avoid. Do not put up bikini pictures. Do not put up things that invite people to comment on your body and body shame. Don't do that. It's not wise. You also want to talk about what they need to actually report, like bullying or predatory behavior. Those are things you just have to talk about. And so those are important. This one's a difficult one, but it's so true. Make sure teens understand that even if it's Snapchat and it's up for a moment, somebody can screenshot that thing. Nothing is really private. Nothing is really gone. And they need to understand that. And yes, colleges are using it. And yes, people are coming back 10 years later and firing people over things that they posted before. I know high schools I'm familiar with, multiple ones have had all kinds of issues about that. Nothing that they post is truly private. They need to know that. They need to, both of you need to research. I already mentioned TikTok and Snapchat. I don't necessarily recommend those. There's some real problems with both of those sites. So you really want to research carefully what those are before you give teens permission. And when you do, you want to go ahead and work with your teen to set up the account. Sit by them and set the privacy. Because they can have just family and friends. They can have a highly private kind of thing. You don't want it open to anybody but in the public. So again, easy to research these things and then sit down while they're doing it. The other thing you want to do is you become part of that social media. These are real mistakes people make, and they can have legal implications and health implications and all kinds of things. And so you want to make sure that you're part of the social media network, that you're doing it. And I already mentioned it's great to have a cousin or somebody else who maybe is a little older than them, who's responsible, looking out for them and letting you know if they see anything that's problematic when you didn't see it. Comment sparsely. It's not real cool for teens to have lots of comments from mom. Okay? So comment sparsely. You just want to kind of see what's going on. And if there's something you don't care for, don't reprimand them online. Wow, because that's going to make them feel terrible, and their friends will make fun of them, all those things. Talk about it offline, help them take off the post, those kinds of things if they've made some mistakes. And these are just what the research tells us. The major factors that affect whether social media is positive or negative. Number one, how long do they spend on it? If you remember, I said 1 hour or less. Much fewer problems than when people are spending 2 hours or more on it. I mentioned how often they check it. Checking it a lot is problematic. Often they're looking for certain things, and so checking it infrequently is usually associated with better outcomes. If your child is going on to connect with friends, that's the best thing, that's the best outcomes, if they really want to connect. If they're going on because I really want to see if I get a lot of likes on this picture, if I'm going on because I don't feel good about myself and I want people to feed my ego, those are not good things. So talk about the purpose. The purpose, if you're connecting, kids are more likely to make good choices. The less your kids' emotions and identity are tied up in their social media, the better. And that's part of why less time is better, is they don't get so much of who they are wrapped up in it. Because then when there's attacks on it or when people aren't liking it, then their self-esteem plummets. It can be all kinds of problems. And finally, it's what happens. And that's why you want to know. You want to be involved in some way. When it's connection, that's great. Social media can have good impacts on people if there's support, if people are being creative and putting up something like a beautiful picture that they took of a sunset, positive humor. But there's a lot of bullying that happens, there's a lot of exclusion that happens, social comparisons, and even dangerous challenges that have taken people's lives. I mean, that kind of stuff you need to be paying attention to. So we want to handle it and handle it with care. The last thing I'm going to do as we close this session off is set your family up for offline success. If they get off of their devices and there's nothing to do and they can't think of something to do, it's problematic. So lots of things you can do. Let me just finish up with this. Consider scheduling screen-based after they learn how to do homework, chores. You might want to say, you got to exercise first. Got to go take a walk. We got a stationary bicycle, go do that, whatever it looks like. You might want to ask them to do something for somebody else first. Be a little less self-oriented. Okay, so think of something you can do for a brother or sister. Think of something you could do for grandma. Think of something we could do. Reading is a great thing to do. Reading is part of mass media, but it's probably one of our most positive mass mediums. Reading or doing something creative, go play an instrument. So a lot of families will have a checklist of things you do before you do your media content, and that can be helpful. It gets them used to thinking through things to do when they're not online. Foster in-person social opportunities, because one of the challenges is as kids don't learn to interact with other kids, they don't get any better at their social skills. Give them opportunities to get good at their social skills. Invite people over to the house. This is a hard one. You got a picture there of there's the TV and there's a nice comfy couch. Best practices say, get something else in front of the comfy couch. Put the TV someplace where it's not so comfortable. It's not the best seats in the house. Can help offline. They're not always going there and just automatically picking up a remote and sitting and watching something. Create attractive non-media places like a craft table or a Lego building table or something along those lines so that they've got someplace they can go to be creative offline. And even have the whole family, this is something we did, brainstorm a list of non-media activities you can do and put them on the refrigerator. And then they're like, I'm bored, go see the list. We made that great list. Why don't you pick the one that you chose, the one that you contributed? Something like that. So the more we set them up for it, the better off we're going to be. I'm going to go ahead and close out the session here. I'm going to be back here at, I believe it's 3:30, so we can finish up the last of these if we need to as we do the Q&A. But thank you for working through a lot of material in here. I'm hoping that you've got at least 1 or 2 ideas. Again, if you're overwhelmed, don't feel like you got to do them all. Hopefully it's got a few things that you can do. Thanks so much. Off to go speak with the youth just real quickly. If you're interested, this is the last of the recommendations that some people do. You can decide if you like this or not. Some people do a written contract. For example, if they're first giving a kid a cell phone, they might have a written contract, a smartphone or a cell phone of any kind. So you can consider it, and these would be some of the things that are often included if you decide to do something like that. You talk about everything before you start. So time frame, if it's going to last for 6 months or a year, for example, and you can just kind of keep going on these. What does it cover? If you're having trouble with video gaming, you can do a contract about how we're going to handle video games, for example. First year of cell phone use or first year of social media. How much time is allowed is a great thing to talk about, and that we agree on it ahead of time. So there's no question. It's already a written thing. If you're going to posting as part of it, if it's like social media, what's allowed, what isn't? What are the guidelines we're going to follow? If group chats are involved, what's expected? How are we going to handle that? And then what are the consequences for violations? One thing I'm just going to let you know from the research is they recommend not banning cell phone use forever. You can decide if you like this or not. The reason is sometimes kids don't admit when they've done something wrong because they're afraid they're going to lose their phones. So you can certainly have that a consequence, you're going to lose it for 2 weeks or whatever it is, but just to let you know that some of the research has found that kids are much less likely to admit they're having issues if they're afraid that they would lose the phone for good. And then this is just in general. You can see these warning signs here. They're not just media. They can also mean other things, but these can be some of the things that say there's too much media or problem. Mood issues, because we do know depression, sadness, anxiety can go along with too much. Hyperactivity. Some kids don't do well with video games. It'll rile them up, especially before bed. But if it's really an issue, you might want to look into that and think carefully. Sleep disturbances. If they're not sleeping well, they're yawning a lot during the day, they're sleepy during the day. You might want to see if they're sneaking media too. Weight changes, whether it's losing a lot of weight or adding weight. Losing a lot of weight, especially for girls, you want to watch. And any sudden drops in school performance, in friendships, et cetera. And then doing less offline, they're sneaking media more, they're anxious unless they're online. These might need more interventions. These might be actual addictions, problems focusing or concentrating. So again, other things can also cause this, but be aware that sometimes it's just too much media or kids react differently to media. And then the last thing, this just, you can take a phone picture if you want, if you've got it. These are just some online recommendations. These two websites tell you a lot about safety. They've got a lot of good resources. I've got a couple Christian books up there that I think are really good. And these are some secular books. You won't agree with everything in it, but they do have some good and interesting information and research. So I'll just leave that up there. Feel free to take a picture if you would be interested in that. So that's all we didn't get to. We'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A.